What would you do if you discovered your roommate was hiding bodies? Or if mysterious figures surrounded your tent at 3 a.m., whispering words you couldn't understand? Tonight, I'm sharing 9 real encounters that prove sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we invite into our lives. From a bridge haunted by a woman in white, to a camping trip that ended in a desperate midnight escape, these stories will make you question everything you thought you knew about the darkness. But I have to warn you, the third story involves a discovery so disturbing, the police are still investigating to this day. Stay with me, because what happened next will change how you see the world around you. I need to tell you about something that happened when I was 14, something that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. My family planned a camping trip to a remote state park, and I brought along my best friend. We were excited about exploring the forest trails by day and sharing ghost stories around the campfire at night. Neither of us could have predicted that we'd become part of a story far more disturbing than any we could imagine. On our first evening there, we decided to take what we called the walk, our tradition of hiking through the woods after dark with only our flashlights to guide us. The beams cut through the blackness as we moved deeper into the forest than we'd ever ventured before. The temperature seemed to drop with each step. The trees towered above us, their branches creating patterns against the starlit sky. Then we heard something that made us both freeze in place. Whispering, soft at first like wind through leaves, but unmistakably human. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We spun around, our flashlight beams sweeping frantically through the darkness. Nothing. Just shadows and silence. But then the whispering started again, closer this time, more urgent. That's when we saw her. A figure was crawling along the ground, her dark clothing making her nearly invisible against the forest floor. She was muttering words we couldn't quite make out, her voice barely audible but somehow penetrating the night air. If you're already feeling the chills, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. Our flashlights locked onto her as she slowly lifted her head. Her eyes met ours, and she stood up with an unsteady motion. Her voice was thick and slurred as she spoke. "I'm trying to find my campsite." My friend and I exchanged a nervous glance. Despite every instinct telling us to run, we decided to help her. As we guided her back toward the campground, she stumbled repeatedly, her words running together in ways that made no sense. When we finally located her campsite, we discovered something chilling. Her friends had already left. They'd packed up and driven away, completely unaware she was missing. We helped her into her tent, a mix of relief and unease settling over us as we walked back to our own site. The next morning we saw her again. She sat motionless by a cold fire pit, her skin pale and her eyes sunken. When we tried to make eye contact, she stared right through us, as if we weren't even there. For the rest of our trip, she kept appearing, always in our peripheral vision, always watching from the shadows. We tried to avoid her, but she seemed to be everywhere. On our final night, we made a terrible mistake. We decided to take one more walk through the woods. The whispering started immediately, louder than before, almost aggressive in its intensity. We spun around with our flashlights, but again we saw nothing. Then she appeared directly in front of us. But this wasn't the same woman we'd helped days before. Her eyes were completely black, like pools of ink. Her skin had taken on a grayish tone that seemed to match the bark of the surrounding trees. And the whispering, it was coming from her, growing louder and more menacing with each passing second. We tried to run, but our legs felt impossibly heavy, as if roots had grown up through the ground and wrapped around our ankles. She moved toward us, her black eyes fixed on ours, the whispering building to a crescendo that made my ears ring. Then everything went dark. I woke up back at our campsite, my friend shaking me awake, panic written across his face. He said I'd collapsed, just dropped to the ground without warning. When I asked what happened in the woods, his face went white. He insisted we needed to leave immediately. We broke camp faster than I thought possible, throwing everything into the car and driving away without looking back. We never discussed that night again, but I still see her sometimes in my dreams, standing in dark forests, whispering words I can't quite understand, her black eyes searching for something she'll never find. When I first met Daniel, he seemed perfectly normal. We were both looking for someone to split rent with, and he checked all the boxes, polite, clean, easy to talk to. Moving in together seemed like a practical solution for both of us. The first few weeks were actually great. Daniel would cook dinner occasionally, help with household chores, and we'd spend evenings watching movies or discussing our days. He worked at a small bookstore downtown, and I had my job at a local coffee shop. Life was simple and comfortable. But slowly things began to change. Daniel started coming home late, sometimes not until 2 or 3 in the morning. When I'd ask where he'd been, he'd give vague answers about meeting friends or working late. But there was something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite identify, that made me uneasy. I'd hear him on the phone sometimes, speaking in a calm voice that somehow made my skin crawl. Once I clearly heard him say, "They can't find out. It's too risky." When I asked him about it the next day, he laughed it off as work drama. Then came the night that changed everything. I arrived home late from my shift to find the apartment almost completely dark, except for a sliver of light coming from Daniel's room. As I stood in the hallway, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Someone was crying, but it was muffled, as if through a gag. I knocked on his door. The crying stopped abruptly. "Daniel, are you okay?" The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Finally, his voice came through the door. "Yeah, just tired. Going to bed." Drop a like if you're feeling that same sense of dread I felt standing in that hallway. The next morning, Daniel acted completely normal, but I couldn't shake what I'd heard. I started noticing other things, small stains on his clothes that he'd quickly hide, unexplained scratches on his hands and arms. Then I found a knife in the bathroom cabinet with what looked like dried blood on the blade. When I confronted him, he laughed and said he'd cut himself while cooking. But his eyes told a different story. I began avoiding him, spending more time at work or at friends' houses. But the fear followed me everywhere. I knew something was deeply wrong, but I didn't know what to do about it. One evening, I made a decision that would change everything. Daniel had gone out, and I knew he wouldn't be back for several hours. I went into his room, my hands shaking as I opened his closet door. Hidden beneath a pile of clothes was a cardboard box. When I opened it, I felt like I might be sick. Inside were newspaper clippings about unsolved murders in our city. But these weren't just random articles. They were marked up with notes in Daniel's handwriting. There were photographs of the victims, detailed information about the crime scenes, and small personal items that clearly belonged to the deceased. I took photos of everything with my trembling hands, closed the box, and left the apartment. I went straight to the police. The detective I spoke with took my statement seriously. He asked detailed questions about Daniel's behavior, his schedule, everything I'd noticed. They told me they'd investigate, but that I should stay somewhere else for my safety. The next few days were a blur of fear and confusion. I stayed with a friend, jumping at every sound, unable to sleep. The police kept me updated. They were watching Daniel, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. That moment came on a Tuesday night. Daniel was caught trying to dispose of items that belonged to one of the victims. The evidence in our apartment, combined with what they found that night, linked him to multiple murders spanning several months. When I finally went back to collect my belongings, the apartment felt different, darker, heavier, as if the walls themselves held secrets. As I was packing, I found an envelope on my bed with my name on it. Inside was a note in Daniel's handwriting. "I'm sorry you found out this way. I never wanted to hurt you. You were the only real friend I had. Goodbye." I left that apartment and never returned. I moved to a different city, trying to start over, but the experience changed me fundamentally. I became more cautious, more aware of the darkness that can hide behind a friendly smile. Every night, I wonder how many signs I missed, how many lives could have been saved if I'd noticed sooner. The guilt and fear became permanent residents in my mind, a constant reminder that sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one you trust the most. The highway stretched out before me like a black ribbon, disappearing into nothingness. It was past midnight, and I'd been driving for hours, eager to get home after a long work trip. The radio had lost its signal miles back, leaving me alone with the hum of my engine and my increasingly tired thoughts. That's when I noticed the gas gauge hovering just above empty. I should have filled up at the last town, but I'd convinced myself I could make it to the next station. Now that decision seemed like a terrible mistake. The engine began to sputter. I pressed the accelerator, but it was no use. With a final cough, the car died, and I coasted to the shoulder of the empty highway. I turned the key repeatedly, but the engine wouldn't catch. I was out of gas in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense forest on both sides. I pulled out my phone, no signal. Of course there wasn't. Comment below if you've ever been stranded in the middle of nowhere. It's terrifying, right? I decided to wait in the car with the doors locked. Maybe someone would drive by, or maybe my phone would pick up a signal. The alternative, walking through the darkness, seemed far worse. Time crawled by. Every rustle of leaves, every distant sound made my heart race. The darkness outside seemed to press against the windows, thick and suffocating. Then I saw movement at the edge of the forest. A figure emerged from between the trees, a man tall and disheveled, with wild hair and torn clothing. He looked like he'd been living in the woods for days, maybe weeks. He walked directly toward my car with determined steps. When he reached my window, he stopped and peered in, his face inches from the glass. Then he started knocking, slowly at first, then harder, more insistent. "Let me in," he said, his voice muffled but urgent. "I need help." Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay put. I shook my head, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "Please," he said, pounding harder on the window. "Let me in." I didn't know what to do. My mind raced through possibilities. Was he really in trouble? Was this some kind of trap? The fear was overwhelming. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I saw headlights approaching from behind. Relief flooded through me as I realized it was a police car. I honked my horn frantically to get their attention. The police car slowed down and pulled up behind me. 2 officers got out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The man from the woods immediately stepped back, his eyes darting nervously between me and the officers. "Is everything all right here?" one officer asked, shining his flashlight into my car. I unlocked the door and practically fell out of the car, explaining what had happened. The empty gas tank, the man from the woods, everything. The officers turned to the man, who was already backing away toward the tree line. "Sir, what are you doing out here?" one of them called out. The man didn't answer. He turned and walked back into the woods, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as he'd appeared. The officers watched him go, then turned back to me. "You're lucky we came by when we did," one of them said. "It's not safe to be out here alone at night. We'll call a tow truck for you and give you a ride to the nearest town." As I sat in the back of the police car, waiting for the tow truck, I kept looking back at the woods where the man had disappeared. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd narrowly escaped something terrible, though I'd never know exactly what. That night taught me to always keep my gas tank full and to trust my instincts when something feels wrong. Sometimes the help we need comes just in time, and sometimes the danger we avoid is closer than we realize. I was 30 when I rented a room in a 3-bedroom house. The landlord, Mr. Thompson, seemed oddly eager to rent to me without asking for references or running a background check. I needed a place quickly and the rent was cheap, so I didn't ask questions. The house was old but comfortable, with a shared bathroom and common areas. My only roommate was named Elizabeth. She worked night shifts and slept during the day, so our paths never crossed. I'd lived there over a month before I realized I'd never actually seen her. Strange things started happening almost immediately. I'd leave my keys on the kitchen counter and find them on the dining table. My toothbrush would be damp when I hadn't used it. At first, I blamed my own forgetfulness, but the occurrences became impossible to ignore. One afternoon, I came home from work to find the front door slightly open. I was certain I'd locked it that morning. I walked inside cautiously, calling out to see if anyone was home. Silence greeted me. Everything appeared normal, but I felt it, that unmistakable sensation of someone having been in my space, going through my things. Subscribe if you're hooked, because what I discovered next will change everything. Late at night, I'd hear footsteps above me, even though Elizabeth was supposedly at work. Once, I heard someone humming a lullaby, the sound floating through the house like a ghost song. I told myself it was just the old house settling, but I knew better. The breaking point came on a Friday evening. I was relaxing in the living room, watching television, when I felt eyes on me. I turned around slowly, and there she was, Elizabeth, standing in the hallway, just watching me in the darkness. The living room light suddenly flickered off. In the dim glow from the TV, I saw her shadow in the doorway. Then she turned and walked away without saying a word. "Elizabeth?" I called out, my voice shaking. No response. I rushed to my room and locked the door, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I barely slept that night, every small sound making me jump. The next morning, I packed a bag and checked into a nearby motel. I called Mr. Thompson and told him about the strange occurrences. He seemed concerned, but offered no real explanations or solutions. After getting some proper sleep at the motel, I returned to the house to collect more of my belongings. The house felt different, quieter, heavier, as if it were holding its breath. As I passed Elizabeth's room, I noticed the door was slightly open. Curiosity overcame caution, and I gently pushed it wider. The room was dark and looked like it hadn't been used in years. Dust covered every surface. The bed was made but clearly untouched for a long time. Old photographs lined the walls. I stepped inside for a closer look. The photos showed a young woman who resembled the figure I'd seen in the hallway. One photo in particular caught my attention. It showed Mr. Thompson, much younger, standing next to the woman. I turned it over. The date written on the back was from 20 years ago. A cold realization washed over me. I grabbed the photo and ran out of the house, driving straight to Mr. Thompson's office. When I showed him the photograph, all color drained from his face. He sat down heavily and told me the truth. Elizabeth was his sister. She'd disappeared 20 years ago under mysterious circumstances. He'd kept her room exactly as it was, hoping she'd return someday. He'd never told any tenants about her, because he didn't want to accept that she was gone. But I knew what I'd seen. The Elizabeth living in that house, watching me from the hallway, moving my things, making those sounds at night, wasn't his sister. Or at least, not in the way he hoped. I moved out immediately and found a new apartment. I never went back to that house, but sometimes late at night, I still think about her. Who is she? What did she want? And more terrifying, is she still there, waiting in the shadows for the next tenant to arrive? Some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some houses hold secrets that were never meant to be discovered. My girlfriend and I decided to celebrate our anniversary with a camping trip to a remote campground 5 hours from home. We left the day after a massive storm had passed through the area, eager for some time in nature. When we arrived at the entrance, the attendant mentioned we'd be the only people there for the weekend. At the time, we thought it sounded perfect, just us in the wilderness. We drove down the winding pathways to our designated camping area. The deeper we went, the narrower the road became, until we realized we'd have to back all the way out when we left. We set up our tent and decided to explore the surrounding woods. The forest was eerily silent. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, just dead quiet. We walked for miles, trying to enjoy the scenery, but something felt off. Eventually, we reached a clearing where several white cabins stood in perfect rows. They were uniform and identical like military barracks, but there was no sign of life anywhere. No cars, no people, nothing. The place had an unsettling atmosphere that made us both want to leave. Hit that like button if you've ever had that feeling that you shouldn't be somewhere. We headed back to camp and tried to start a fire. Neither of us had much camping experience, and everything around us was soaked from yesterday's storm. We struggled for over an hour, finally getting a small fire going with some self-lighting logs from the store. We ate hot dogs and marshmallows as darkness fell, looking up at the stars. But as the night grew darker, the silence became oppressive. My girlfriend started to get nervous, so we extinguished the fire and got into our tent. We were talking quietly when she suddenly put her hand over my mouth. "Shoo," she whispered. "Do you hear that?" I listened. Heavy footsteps were approaching, crunching through the leaves and debris on the forest floor. But there was something else too, low mumbling, like people talking but keeping their voices deliberately quiet. "It's probably just animals," I whispered back, though I knew animals didn't sound like that. But then we heard it clearly, voices. Words we couldn't make out, but unmistakably human speech, hushed and intense. We sat frozen in complete darkness, not daring to move or make a sound. The footsteps grew louder, along with the mumbling, until it sounded like they were right outside our tent. Then silence. Complete and total silence. We waited for what felt like hours, barely breathing, listening for any sign of movement. My girlfriend finally whispered, "We have to get to your car." The adrenaline kicked in. I peeked out of the tent into the darkness and told her to stay close behind me. We ran to the car, and I locked the doors the instant we were inside. I looked around frantically for any sign of who, or what, had been outside our tent. Nothing. We seemed completely alone. "Okay," I said, trying to catch my breath. "I'm going to grab our stuff. Stay in the car." I jumped out and ran to grab our cooler, throwing it into the back seat. But when I turned to get the tent, I heard them again, footsteps, approaching fast from multiple directions. In a moment of pure panic, I yanked the tent poles out of the ground, wrapped the whole thing in its tarp, and threw it over my shoulder. I shoved it into the trunk and jumped back into the driver's seat. "Do we have everything?" I asked, my hands shaking. "Yes, just go." I slammed the car into reverse and started backing up the narrow path as fast as I dared. When we reached a fork in the road with 6 different directions, I realized neither of us could remember which way we'd come in. I picked one at random, and we ended up at someone else's campsite. I cursed, threw it in reverse again, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Off to our right, deep in the woods near where our campsite had been, a single small green light glowed in the darkness. Just one light, unblinking, watching. I found the correct path back to the entrance and drove those 5 hours home without stopping. We collapsed on my girlfriend's parents' couch around 4 a.m. We never talked about that trip again. To this day, I don't know who those people were in the woods, what they wanted, or what that green light was. But I know one thing for certain: I'll never go camping again. I grew up in a small town in South Texas where everyone knows everyone and nothing exciting ever happens. When I was 19, that all changed in a single night. My boyfriend Jack and 2 friends, Amy and Mike, were bored and looking for an adventure. It was a warm summer night, and we were driving around aimlessly when Jack suggested we visit an old cemetery on the town's outskirts. The cemetery hadn't been used since the 1800s and had a reputation for being haunted. We all thought it sounded like fun at the time. We drove down an old back road barely wide enough for Jack's car. The trees on both sides were thick and tall, blocking out most of the moonlight. The further we went, the quieter everything became. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just our tires crunching on gravel. It was about 3 a.m. when we pulled up to the cemetery. The gate hung crooked on rusted hinges, and a thin fog had begun to roll in, adding to the eerie atmosphere. As we stood outside the car, a chill ran down my spine despite the warm night. We started walking into the cemetery when Amy grabbed my arm. "What's that?" she whispered, pointing toward the far end. We all squinted into the darkness. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then I saw them clearly. 4 figures in white hooded robes, moving in a slow circle around a grave. My heart started racing. "We should go," I said, my voice trembling. But we all stood frozen, unable to look away from the bizarre ritual happening before us. The figures moved with deliberate, synchronized movements, as if performing some kind of ceremony. Jack finally snapped out of it. "Yeah, let's get out of here," he said, his bravado completely gone. "Make sure you're subscribed, because these next few stories get even more intense." We turned and ran back to the car. Jack fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking as badly as mine. The second the engine started, he floored it, leaving the cemetery and those hooded figures far behind. The drive back was completely silent. We were all too shaken to speak. When we finally reached town, Jack parked and we just sat there for several minutes, trying to process what we'd witnessed. "What were they doing?" Amy finally asked, breaking the silence. "I don't know and I don't want to know," Mike replied, his voice still shaky. "We made a pact that night, never to return to that cemetery and never to speak of what we'd seen. But the memory has stayed with me all these years. I still drive past that old back road sometimes, and every time I do, I feel that same chill run down my spine. I can't help but wonder who those figures were and what ritual they were performing in that abandoned cemetery at 3 a.m. Some questions are better left unanswered, and some places are meant to remain undisturbed. I never imagined I'd end up with such a disturbing roommate. It started innocently enough when I moved into a small apartment in the city. The rent was affordable, and the location was perfect for my job. My new roommate's name was Alex, a tall, thin man with sunken eyes that always seemed to be staring at something I couldn't see. At first, I dismissed his odd behavior as simple eccentricity. He kept to himself mostly, spending long hours locked in his room. But as days turned into weeks, I started noticing disturbing things. It began with whispers. Late at night, when the rest of the world slept, I'd hear Alex talking to himself behind his closed door. At first, I thought he was on the phone, but the whispers grew louder and more urgent, as if he were having an intense conversation with someone. Then came the smells. Foul odors seeped from under Alex's door, rotten and decaying, like something had died in there. When I confronted him, he laughed it off, claiming he'd spilled something and hadn't cleaned it up yet. But the stench only grew stronger. What disturbed me most was the way Alex moved through the apartment. He seemed to drift like a shadow, always awake when I stumbled out for water in the middle of the night. His dark, unreadable eyes would follow me, sending shivers down my spine. One night, unable to sleep, I decided I had to know what was happening. I crept down the hallway, my heart pounding, until I reached Alex's door. It was slightly ajar, with a thin line of flickering light spilling out. I pushed the door open slowly. What I saw will haunt me forever. Alex stood in the center of the room, surrounded by dozens of candles casting dancing shadows on the walls. In his hands, he held an ancient-looking book with yellowed pages. But it wasn't just the candles and book that terrified me. It was what he was doing. He was chanting in a low, guttural voice, speaking words in a language I'd never heard. The air felt thick with dark energy, making it hard to breathe. Then I saw it in the corner, a figure, hunched and twisted, with eyes that glowed with malevolence. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, and ran to my room. I huddled under my covers, praying for morning to come. Drop a comment if you'd have run away immediately. I should have. Morning brought no relief. Alex's behavior became even more erratic, his whispers more frenzied. Then one night, he simply disappeared. I searched the entire apartment, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, lurking somewhere in the shadows, watching and waiting. Weeks passed with no sign of Alex. I tried to resume normal life, but fear gnawed at me constantly. Then one night, I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from within the walls. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just rodents, but the scratching grew louder and more insistent. Then, one by one, dark figures began emerging from the shadows, twisted, crawling things that skittered across the floor with their eyes fixed on me. I knew then that I had to leave, to escape before whatever Alex had been doing consumed me too. But as I turned to go, I saw him, Alex, standing in the doorway, his eyes completely empty. "You can't leave," he said, his voice like ice. "You belong to us now." I ran then, harder and faster than I'd ever run in my life, never looking back. Though I've tried to forget, to move on, I know I'll never truly escape. The memory of Alex and whatever dark forces he was involved with will haunt me until the end of my days. A constant reminder that some doors should never be opened, and some roommates are better left unknown. It was late at night, and I was driving home with my 2 young children in the back seat. They'd been arguing and fussing for the past hour, and I was exhausted. I decided to pull over to calm them down and talk to them. I turned on the hazard lights and stepped out, opening the back door to address my kids. "Listen, you two need to stop fighting. It's late, and we need to get home safely." As I was speaking to them, a car pulled up beside us. The window rolled down, revealing a middle-aged couple with friendly smiles. The man leaned out and said, "Hey there, is everything okay?" "Yes, we're fine," I replied. "Just dealing with some tired kids." The woman in the passenger seat nodded sympathetically. "We wanted to let you know there's been a serious accident over the next hill. Traffic is completely stopped. If you take the side road about a mile back, it'll route you around the accident and get you home much faster." I thanked them for the information, and they waved as they drove off. I got back in the car and considered their advice. I didn't know the area well, and taking an unknown side road in the dark didn't appeal to me. Despite their warning, I decided to stick to the main road, even if it meant sitting in traffic. As I drove past the road they'd mentioned, I glanced over, and what I saw made my heart skip a beat. The couple's car was parked on the side of the detour road. Both of them were standing outside the vehicle, completely motionless, staring into the dense woods. There was nothing else around, just dark trees stretching endlessly in every direction. Subscribe now. This story takes an even darker turn. The sight was deeply unsettling, but I told myself they might have car trouble or needed a moment to stretch. I kept driving, pushing the image from my mind. As I crested the hill, I was surprised to find the road completely empty. No accident, no traffic jam, just clear highway ahead. I felt a wave of relief, but also confusion. Why had they lied about the accident? The next morning, I had to drive the same route for errands. As I approached the detour road, my heartbeat quickened. I slowed down, and that's when I saw it. Just past where the couple had been standing, there was a large sign that read "Dead Yendi." My mind raced. They'd been standing there in the darkness with nowhere to go. Why would they send me down a road that led nowhere? What were they doing there? Years have passed since that night, but I still think about it constantly. Every time I drive past that detour road, I feel a shiver run down my spine. What would have happened if I'd taken their advice? Would I have been stuck at that dead end in the middle of nowhere? Or worse, sometimes late at night, when I'm driving alone, I think I see their car out of the corner of my eye, always in the same spot, just past the hill before the dead-end sign. But when I look directly, there's nothing there. I don't know who they were or what they wanted, but I'm grateful I trusted my instincts that night. It's a mystery that haunts me, a reminder that not everyone you meet has good intentions. If you ever find yourself driving through the countryside and someone offers you a shortcut, think twice. Sometimes the long way around is the safest way home. It was late on a Friday night when I finally left the office. The clock showed it was almost midnight. I'd been working late all week and was exhausted. The regular route through the city would be busy even at this hour, so I decided to take a rural route instead. It was longer, but much quieter. I turned onto the narrow country road. The moon was full, and stars dotted the sky. The road was empty, with only the hum of my engine and the occasional rustle of leaves to keep me company. After driving for a while, I felt uneasy. The night seemed darker, the air colder. Up ahead, I saw an old bridge. I'd crossed it before, but only during daylight. At night, it looked completely different, almost menacing. As I approached, I noticed something strange. A red fog was rolling across the bridge, thick and glowing faintly. I'd never seen anything like it before. The fog made the bridge look even more sinister, but I told myself it was just my tired mind playing tricks. I drove onto the bridge, and the wooden planks creaked under my car's weight. The fog grew thicker until I could barely see a few feet ahead. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I pressed the accelerator, desperate to get across. Finally, I reached the other side. I let out a sigh of relief and glanced in my rearview mirror. My heart nearly stopped. There, standing in the middle of the bridge, was a figure, a woman in a white dress with long hair hanging down. She was just standing there, staring directly at my car. Make sure to like this video if your heart is racing right now. Mine still does. I blinked and looked again. She was still there, motionless in the red fog, watching me drive away. I didn't dare stop or turn back. I just kept driving, my eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror. When I got home, I locked every door and window, my heart still pounding. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, a shadow in the fog. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. The next morning, I told my parents about the figure on the bridge. They exchanged a serious look, and my dad's expression grew grave. "You saw her, didn't you?" he asked quietly. "Who?" I replied, my voice shaking. "The woman on the bridge. There's an old story about that place. Many years ago, a young woman took her own life there. People say her spirit still haunts the bridge." I felt a cold chill run through me. What happened to her? My dad explained that no one knows the full story. Some say she was waiting for a lover who never came. Others say she was fleeing from something terrible. But everyone agrees she died on that bridge, and her spirit never left. I sat there, my breakfast forgotten. The figure in the red fog suddenly made horrifying sense. I'd seen the ghost of a woman who had died in despair, trapped forever on that bridge. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. I'd dream of the bridge, the red fog, and the figure in white standing there watching me. I took the city route after that, even though it added time to my commute. One evening, curiosity overcame my fear. I researched the bridge's history and found old newspaper articles. The woman's name was Emily. She was supposed to meet her lover on the bridge one night, but he never showed. Heartbroken and hopeless, she ended her life there. People had been reporting sightings for years. Always the same description. A woman in a white dress standing in red fog, watching cars pass by. Some said she was searching for her lost love. Others believed she was trying to warn people away from the bridge. Knowing her story didn't make it easier. If anything, it made everything worse. I felt terrible for Emily, trapped in eternal sadness, unable to find peace. About a month later, I found myself on that rural route again. I had to know if she was still there. As I approached the bridge, my heart raced. The red fog appeared, thick and glowing just as before. I drove onto the bridge and stopped the car. Rolling down my window, I whispered, "I'm sorry for what happened to you. I hope you find peace." For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the figure appeared, Emily, standing in her white dress. But this time, something was different. The fog started to lift, and she began to fade. I watched until she disappeared completely, taking the red fog with her. The bridge felt different afterward, lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted. I drove home with a strange sense of calm. I hoped that somehow, Emily had finally found the peace she'd been searching for all these years. I never saw her again after that night, but I always remember her when I drive past the old bridge. Her story reminds me that some spirits are just lost souls looking for closure, and sometimes all they need is someone to acknowledge their pain. Thank you for staying with me through all 9 of these terrifying true stories. If these gave you chills, please hit that like button and subscribe for more horror stories every day. Share this video with your friends and family, but maybe not right before bedtime. Which story scared you the most? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, the next time you're alone in the dark, you might want to think twice about what could be watching you from the shadows. Until next time, stay safe out there,